us a second? Thank you. Sorry, Ryan usually I usually get Ryan to jump in and I forgot, so my apologies on that one. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, now it started.
Thank you, everybody, for joining our meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:04 p.m. for the Finance and Corporate Services Committee of the City of Barrie. Due to our COVID-19 pandemic physical distancing measures, we are meeting virtually with the City Clerk and staff at hand to answer questions. We don't have any open delegations or presentations or standing item committee updates or referred items, but we have advisory committee reports. We have five of the advisory committee reports to be received tonight. Could a member of the committee put the following advisory reports on the virtual floor to be received? And I will just read them out loud. They are 5.1, report of the Seniors Advisory Committee dated February 22nd, 2021. Report of the Accessibility Committee dated March 11th, 2021. Report of Seniors Advisory dated March 22nd, 2021. And the report of the Investment Board dated April 7th, 2021, as well as the report of the Accessibility Advisory Committee dated April 8th, 2021. Could I have a member put those on the floor? Mayor Lehman, I saw him first, seconded by Deputy Mayor Ward. Okay, they're on the floor as printed. Any questions from members of the committee on these reports? Nope. Okay, any questions from any members of council in attendance? Councilor Alwyn? Nope. Okay, so I'm gonna call to vote to accept those reports as printed. All those in favor, please indicate. In favor, that passes. Yes, Councillor Thompson, that passes unanimously. Thank you. We now have two recommendations from the advisory committee reports, and the first recommendation is from the Investment Board, dated April 7th, 2021. My apologies, I think I said accessibility earlier. Advisory committee reports. The first motion is Investment Management Annual Report. That the report to the Investment Board concerning the 2020 Investment Management Annual Report and approved by the Investment Board on April 7th, 2021 be received for information. Could I have a member put that on the floor as read? Councillor Damaris, seconded by Deputy Mayor Ward. Any questions or comments from members of committee? Mayor Lehman. Mayor Lehman, I think you're on mute still.
That's so 2020 of me. Sorry, I got rid of the virtual background too. My living room is worse, but at least I can hold up my card. Just a quick question for staff. I mean, first of all, I think this might be the first motion that we've passed up from the investment board, probably in the history of the city, because it is the first time the investment board has reported through us to council. I think the report's very well written and compliments to Thierry and his team for making a complex subject very understandable, lots of graphs and charts to show it to us. My question specifically, though, maybe I missed it, but the average balance of our fixed income investments over the course of the year, I assume that fluctuates based on what's placed at any particular time, but working backwards from the percent return and the dollars, I got to a number a little less than $200 million. Could staff just comment as to how much we have sitting in those? And those are our reserve funds that are invested so that they make us at least a little bit of money, as we see in the report. But what is that amount that is typically invested through this mix of fixed income instruments?
So through you, Chairman Morales, if I could just ask Ryan to let Thierry join us. There he is. I'll let Thierry answer the question.
Thierry, go ahead. You can unmute.
He is there. I think he's having some technical issues. Mayor Lehman, I'll just jump in. Last year, I believe the average was close to 200 million, probably slightly less than that. And again, that encompasses our overall working capital. So yes, it includes the reserves and any other working capital that we use to pay the bills.
Gary. You have your Zoom mute not activated, so we should be able to hear you unless there's just on your end, your microphone is low or not capturing it, but you're good on the Zoom end. Mr. Miller, if you want to, is there
Yeah.
anything you?
So, I mean, I can continue with my questions, Mr. Chair, if you want.
For sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that amount would fluctuate depending on the city's needs for working capital and deposits into the reserves, for example, as large development charge receipts come in and so forth, I would assume. And part of the reason for the higher than traditional performance, at least until this year and then disruption of COVID, was because we were moving that more frequently to higher interest opportunities. Basically, the city used to stick its money in the bank and just take the terribly, terribly low interest rate that gave us. And we started being more active in moving money into bonds and other fixed income instruments that get a better return for the taxpayer. I guess what I'm looking for is some sense of how much that amount fluctuates during the course of the year. And I mean, you're obviously, the investment board and your team, Craig, are working in a portfolio of investments. So some would mature in a month, some would mature in many months. But how much does that amount fluctuate over the course of the year?
So through you, Chairman Morales, to Mayor Lehman, members of committee. So in the report, you can see, so we have held a bond portfolio, which was sort of it was a longer term view. A lot of it was coming due this year, which was part of the strategy as we moved to the prudent investor board. So that component of the portfolio, which I'm just trying to pull up the number, did not really change. As I say, we allocated, if you bear with me, the overall bond portfolio is 28%. So of the 28 million, that stays within the bond portfolio. The cash flow, which is a big improvement from where we used to be as well, was Thierry and his team. We don't really sit on a lot of cash in the bank. They look for opportunities, whether it's through high interest savings accounts or other short-term instruments to maximize the cash. So they regularly move through the money. Last year was an odd year because of the COVID cycle. So we had deferred tax payments and things of that nature. So I don't have that number directly in front of me. I'd have to defer to Thierry on that one. But the balance in cash that we have had has certainly increased over the last 2-3 years compared to where it was 5 years ago. And you know, I anticipate, while we are a growth municipality and we have a lot of capital needs. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of money in, money out. So our long-term horizon is still really short-term. It's really kind of the next 3 to 5 years is kind of as far out as we look to project. So I don't know if Thierry, I see is if he is available to add anything else to that, I'll defer to him.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. For some reason, I could hear everyone. And anyways, so through you, Councillor Morales, to Mayor Lehman. Yeah. So as Craig was mentioning, I think the last 2 years have been a little bit a transition year as we started moving towards the prudent investor standard. So if you look at 2020, so 2020, we did not, we positioned the portfolio so that we could easily transition towards the prudent investor standard. So we did not buy new bonds, so we had mostly maturities. So we started about a balance about like 80 million in bond investment. And then anything that was maturing, I think we had about like 30 million maturing during the year. And all that was being moved towards money market instruments. So the posture has been for 2020, 2019, 2020, just a transition, letting bonds mature and then moving to a more money market instrument as we look to add more asset classes.
Okay. So a quick comment, Mr. Chair, and I guess a question, a request maybe for a bit more information. So first of all, I think, you know, if this report wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago because it didn't, these activities weren't being undertaken by the corporation to manage our money in the way that we're doing it now. And the result of that is the returns that we see in this report. Which is straight benefit to our bottom line and our ability to do more for our residents. I guess, sorry, I should ask one other question, Thierry, which is, this is our portfolio of fixed income investments. There's also, of course, our investment in Electra. And that is, you know, roughly equivalent, I think, in scale, if you're in terms of cash in. And the performance of Electra versus the performance of the money market returns. Obviously, Electra comes with the higher risk of being in the electricity systems business, but it's a little bit higher at the moment in terms of the performance of that investment. Do you compare these? Do you assess it in terms of, should we be putting more into one or a different area of investment?
Through you, Councilor Morales, to Mr. Lehman, is Mayor Lehman. It is so the two, as we I don't know if you recall when we had this conversation at the beginning of the Investor Standard program, is that Electra is really, it's not a liquid, it's a private entity, so which currently makes us have an exposure towards equity. But the prudent investor standard is going more towards more market equities, things that are more frequently traded. So if we look at everything from a portfolio perspective, meaning that as we start buying more equities, we would be cognizant of the fact that we already have exposure to the energy sector. So most likely next year, when we're looking at a portfolio allocation, you wouldn't see a heavy weight towards this similar investment. But if we were to say that we're going to move more toward adding more to Electra, it wouldn't really be going towards diversifying our investment.
Oh, that's what I was hoping to hear. Is I think that, you know, by understanding that we're in some ways balancing it with the decisions that the investment board is recommending and that you are making as staff in terms of the rest of our portfolio. Just one request for information, Mr. Chair, I think, which is, you know, I think the report does a very good job of sort of saying what's unusual this year, comparing it to last year's performance. I think there's a story here that needs to be told a little bit further back, though, which is our investment performance going back a few more years. And the reason for that is it will help, I think, myself and members of council understand the impact of the changes that have been made. We approved the creation of an investment board at your recommendation. We achieved prudent investor status as the city of Barrie, and that has meant we've been able to do more. You've been able to do more in managing the corporation's funds, working capital. And I think, so if it's possible, and we can maybe augment this report or provide a memo or an email even in addition, I think it would be very good to look at the city's returns on its deposits and fixed income investments going back, say, 5, 7, even 10 years, because I think we'll notice a pretty substantial difference. And that difference is as a result of the approach that's been outlined here and is supported by the investment board. So all of this is a positive. I want to thank staff for this. I'm pleased to see this first kind of report and to be frank, the sophistication that's going into managing a portfolio of different bonds and fixed income instruments that ultimately the bottom line is better because the return for our taxpayer is higher, and that means we are able to fund more of our activities out of that interest. So appreciate the report, and maybe without a little additional information, I'm happy to, of course, support receiving it.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Councillor Jim Harris.
Thank you, Chair Morales. Just a question. I'm not sure if this is in line or out of line, but I'll ask. Is this the type of information. It's really great work that would be of value to have a presentation at council, or no, it's something that we wouldn't recommend doing? Just curious. Because to Mary Leeman's point about having that history and showing the difference in the value, I just wondered if that, what you, maybe that's a question through, I'm not sure, through to Mr. Miller or Mr. Prowse, but just curious.
So through you, Chairman Morales, we can certainly do a presentation. We have in the past come to Finance and Corporate Services the last number of years, and Thierry has done a presentation. This year we have as Mayor Lehman pointed out, this is the first year we've actually had the Prudent Investor Board. So we have the team that we report to through them, and as a result, there's an additional step in there. So it was just in terms of workload and getting things done, we went with the staff report approach this time around. But yeah, that is certainly something, you know, we can, if that's committee's wish, we could certainly do a presentation on the activities that Thierry and company have been doing.
Thank you, Councillor Jim Harris, for the question. Press, is there anything you'd like to add? And then I'll go to Ms. about logistics of doing a presentation.
Thanks, Chair Morales. Just through you to Councillor Jim Harris. The intention is once this information is received and by council, we would be doing a communications plan around this. We think that this continues to be a good news story for the municipality on our financial performance. And to Mayor Lehman's point earlier, the history and the evolution of this has all been very positive. I would note for Finance Committee, by way of a plug, you know, we are certainly a risk adverse level of government, as are many. You know, the gold standard, or one of the gold standards today, perhaps would be the OMERS program. And as members of council may know, OMERS actually lost 2.7% the same year. We provided 2.3% in return. So about a 5% differential from our local Barrie team versus the quite robust OMERS team. So I think that there's some bragging rights there, and our intention would be, once received by council, we would do a little bit of bragging.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Prowse. Ms. Cook, in terms of logistics for a presentation, how soon and how feasible can we get that in front of General Committee or City Council, wherever appropriate?
To you, Councilor Morales, and members of Finance and Corporate Services Committee, I would need to speak with Mr. Miller to find out timing for his staff to prepare a presentation, as well as we would require an amendment to direct staff to provide a presentation. And I would also suggest that if staff are reporting back via memo with the information that the mayor is requesting, that also be an amendment to the motion.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so do any members of the committee want to move one amendment and capturing both Mayor Lehman's request and the request idea to do a presentation, or do we want to handle those separately, members of the committee?
I was voting on Mayor Lehman.
I'll move them both together.
Perfect.
That we have a presentation in council, and that staff provide longer term historical performance information on our fixed income investment portfolio.
Okay, perfect.
Actually, no, I'd actually like it as well on the hydro side. So we'll just say our full investment portfolio, performance on our full investment portfolio.
Okay, perfect. I see our city clerk and I presume Ms. Swan taking notes. So we've got the Toonie Tuesday special moved by Mayor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Jim Harris. Okay, that amendment is on the floor as communicated. Do any members of the committee have any questions about that amendment? Any specific requests about the timeline for the presentation? None? No, just basically when feasible. Okay, fair enough. Councillor Harvey, or nope, we're good. Councillor Alwyn, any questions, comments? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment, please indicate. In favor, myself included, that passes unanimously. Thank you for the amendment. So to the amended motion, so as I had previously read it with the amendment passing, are there any questions or comments from members of committee? None, everything's been covered. Councillor Congo, Councillor Alwyn, any feedback? Nope, okay, I'll take the vote. All those in favor, please indicate. Passes unanimously, perfect, thank you very much. So with that, we will move on to the second recommendation. This from the report of the Accessibility Advisory Committee dated April 8th, 2021. And it reads as follows: investigations of maintenance of pedestrian walkways. That staff in the operations department investigate the current interconnected walkway system in the city to address resident safety and accessibility concerns and the feasibility of facilitating both the summer and winter maintenance to increase pedestrian year-round access, and report back to the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Can I have a member place that motion as read on the floor? Moved by Deputy Mayor Ward, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Any questions or comments on the motion on the floor?
Sorry.
Mayor Lehman?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of that. The sound cut out, and I'm sorry. That might have been my fault, Mr. Chair. So, we just have the motion that's on the floor again?
For the investigations of maintenance of pedestrian walkways that
Okay,
came from.
sorry, it is the walkways one. Okay, yep.
Perfect. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll seeing none. Any Councillor Alwyn, Councillor Kungle, any comments, questions? No. I'll just make a quick one. I know that this has followed council, the balance between extending services and providing value on walkways has been an issue. I know that I think then Councillor Strawn, Mayor Lehman, as your term in council, you probably face similar concerns about Queen's Park and things of that nature. I know that providing service to these walkways has also been and maintenance to these walkways, my apologies, has also kind of come up in the Lennox Park, Loon Avenue area. So it's a delicate balance, but I applaud the members of the committee for bringing an accessibility lens to it. We've always looked at it as is it worth the cost? We've never had kind of the approach of, are we meeting our standards for providing accessibility and human dignity to our operations? So I look forward, if this passes, I look forward to the report and making a decision at that point. Deputy Mayor Ward, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Morales. I just wanted to make a point that hopefully when we get this report, it's not going to be an all or nothing. I think one of the problems in the past is we've seen reports say this is the cost of clearing every walkway. And maybe we don't have to do every walkway. I mean, it can actually be nice to do every walkway, but I think there are some that may be more important. The ones, I always use the example of the one that connects Delaney. There's a Delaney and there's a walkway that goes through to Emma King School, which means if kids don't take it, they've got a really long walk to get to the school. And those are the kind of walkways I think we should prioritize. There are walkways that make a lot of sense. Other ones, maybe they don't have to be clear in the winter because they're really not being used by people to access services. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Ward. Councillor Thompson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd mention, this was actually the work of Councillor Jim Harris, who brought this to the Accessibility Advisory Committee. He had some meetings with some residents, and further to Deputy Mayor Ward's point, that was some of the conversation. The problem is with the ones that enter the school, if they don't hold up their end of the maintenance, it sometimes creates liability. So that was part of the comments made at the committee to maybe engage with the school board to have them look at their side of the catwalks as well. Thanks.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. And Councillor Jim Harris, humble as always, but recognition is important. So especially when, this definitely can possibly have a positive effect on people across the city. Any other questions or comments on this? If not, I'll take the vote. All those in favor, please indicate. Passes unanimously. Thank you. So that has been adopted. We are now moving on to the reports to committee 6.1. So that's 2021 debt issuance scenarios. The motion is as follows. 1, that the 2021 debenture issuance plan be amended as per scenario 2 of paragraph 15. 2, in the report to Finance and Corporate Services Committee dated April 20th, 2021 concerning 2021 debt issuance scenarios and debentures be issued to the projects identified in Appendix A of the report. Section 2, that additional tax-supported debt charges in 2021 be funded first from any year-end surplus and then from the tax stabilization reserve. Section 3, that additional water rate funded debt charges in 2021 be funded first from any year-end surplus and then from the water stabilization reserve. And Section 4, that additional wastewater rate funded debt charges in 2021 be funded first from any year-end surplus and then from the water rate stabilization reserve bracket P8-21 and bracket F29 and bracket. Can I have a member of committee place the motion on the floor as read? You all have copies of it in front of you. Member of committee? Deputy Mayor Ward, seconded by Councillor Jim Harris. On the floor as read. Any questions or comments? Mayor Lehman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and members of committee will probably recall the discussion we had around this at budget time that resulted in this direction and this report. And you may remember that one of the reasons for my asking for this was the recognition that we had some unfunded strategic projects that I'm anticipating in this term of council, and we are in a very low interest rate environment. So I was interested in the potential to either reallocate our planned funding sources for the existing capital plan, and in theory create the room for some of that, or in fact to in some way move ahead. Staff, there was only one paragraph in the report that spoke to that, but the recommendation was to leave that discussion for the 2022 capital plan. And notwithstanding that, I think the balance of the report did accomplish most of what I was seeking to do. And the point about, let's figure out how much we're going to need before we try and figure out where it's going to come from is completely legitimate. So if I look at what's on the table in 2021, we have 3 task forces, each of which may have costs, one for sure, and the other 2 likely will have some degree of capital cost in terms of those outcomes. We also do have capital projects, as we discussed last night, associated with the employment land strategy. On the positive side of the ledger, we've been told we're going to get twice as much gas tax this year from the federal government. So there's $9 million going into the capital plan that wasn't anticipated. All of those puts and takes, I had probably anticipated at budget time we'd be further along in understanding what those numbers are. And so I'm probably okay with the one paragraph that speaks to waiting to deal with the strategic projects piece until later in the year. The possible exception to that would be the decision we made last night around the employment lands. So I guess the other general comment I'd make, and then I had a couple of questions, Mr. Chair, is the 3 scenarios that are presented to us, I think we can be looking at in the context of some of what's changed in the last 3 months as well. And to that end, I guess my first question would be to Thierry, who's still, I think, here in terms of the interest rate environment. One of the reasons that I was sort of wanting to seize the moment is we bottomed out in terms of record low borrowing costs in the late part of 2020. Can you tell us what's happened since and what you see happening in the balance of 2021 in terms of if we don't place debt now, are we likely to face higher rates, later in the year or next year? And where are rates today relative to where we were 6 months ago?
Perfect. Thierry, Councilor Barr.
Through Councilor Morales to Mayor Lehman. Yes, so since we last issued debt, I think you recall last time we issued, we had a record low interest rate at 1.31 for 10-year debenture. Since then, the rates have increased about 75 basis points. So this report does have market implied forward rates, meaning that what the market is anticipating as where interest rates are going to be in 2022, 2023. So at this point, I think we really, as you mentioned, seen kind of the bottom. So in terms of rate increases, the expectation is for gradual increase. Now, the Bank of Canada indicated that they would not be aggressive in moving rates, but currently they're withdrawing some of the liquidity, i.e. the quantitative easing measure that they've injected last year. So to answer is that I think from now on, most likely a gradual increase. Now, to what extent, I think it's also dependent upon what the general economy is going to look like, i.e. COVID-related recovery.
Okay, so if we were to place debt today, we'd be paying 75 basis points more than if we'd placed it back in December or January. Is that roughly the change?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that's the reason I wanted to ask the question. I suspect I didn't actually know it was quite that much, but I knew there'd been an uptick. So, I mean, to some extent, we missed the moment, but we didn't miss the moment because Thierry had been planning for the moment. And as you may recall, my email that led to this in the first place, Thierry and Craig and the team had been waiting to place some debt and had actually looked at what the optimal time to do that would be, and managed to hit one of the record low spots. So we actually did buy the trough, if you will, with the debt that was placed. But it doesn't look like we were able to move fast enough, which I can understand, to be able to achieve quite the degree of benefit that was there 6 months ago. But that's a reality of we're not moving money every week in terms of placing debt. It takes time to do these things, and we have to have actuals from projects to be able to do it. So I guess my second question, Mr. Miller, looking at the report, was you ended up recommending scenario 2. Scenario 3, which is a more aggressive scenario, brings with it, by memory, about twice the savings as forecast compared to scenario 2, but it also has more immediate impact in terms of, we're going to fund that increased debt cost this year. Notwithstanding the rates higher, it's still an incredibly low rate. So is it a good idea? You recommended scenario 2 instead of 3. Maybe you could just tell committee why. I mean, scenario 2, it's great. Only cost us $30,000. So it's almost an immaterial change in terms of our operating impact this year. But there was more savings on the table, and you didn't recommend that. Can you maybe explain why?
Through you, Councilor Morales. So scenario 3, scenario 2 is basically recommending incurred costs to date. So we have incurred, I think it brings to a total of 31 million. If we go to scenario 3, we're issuing 53 million. We haven't incurred those costs yet. So you don't want to go out and borrow money that you end up not needing. So there's the potential that to borrow on budget is a risk. Under the Municipal Act, if we were to do such a scenario where you borrowed too much money, under the Act, you have to then use those borrowed funds against similar projects. So for example, if you borrowed for a wastewater project, you got to use that money for a linear project. So from experience being here at the City of Barrie, and it's, budgeting and capital projects are a difficult task for sure when they find things and they don't find things. So based on that, I certainly wouldn't recommend borrowing for costs that we have yet to incur.
Okay, so the follow-up to that would be, so the risk would be that there isn't enough remaining debenture eligible costs that are expended in other projects. Is that the case?
So it has, again, it would have to be similar projects. So if we borrowed the 53 and then they didn't need the $9 million to finish the other projects that we'd be issuing this on, then we would have to say, okay, what are we using this against? And we'd have to apply it against other projects, which sounds easy, but in reality isn't. So that would be the main rationale.
Do you have to use it in the same year you borrow it? Same fiscal year?
No, but you would have to pay the principal and interest against it as well.
Yeah, of course. So we're paying a mortgage payment on a house we haven't moved into yet in that scenario. Okay, so I guess, Mr. Chair, I admit to a little not frustration. I guess frustration, not with the report, but with the circumstances more than anything. If we were further along, if we had more opportunity within our capital plan, it feels like there could be greater savings here. I think our staff are also aware that our DC situation is in a negative position. They warned us about that last night as we talked about the employment lands piece. Partly because we chose to move more aggressively on the employment lands piece, I'm going to leave this alone tonight and not move any amendment. I do think, there's some obvious benefit that is going to result from changing strategies here and issuing a little bit more debt through scenario 2. But it isn't quite the big move that I'd envisioned. Now, the opportunity for that big move has reduced, or sorry, the benefit of that big move has reduced because of the 75 basis point interest rate hike over the last 4 months. And that's just a reality. It's unfortunate, but that's the circumstance. So I think I'll support the motion on the floor as printed. I'm going to email some more questions to staff, and perhaps those results can be circulated to all members of General Committee. So by the time this comes forward, we have a little more color around what the go forward might be in terms of other major projects that we see on the horizon. And I think most importantly, a lot's happened in the last 4 months. I mean, just the gas tax piece alone, which was a big announcement at the time, but we haven't really had a chance to discuss with management around how that will affect our capital plan and what we might do for our residents with that funding. That's another whole piece to this for 2021 alone. So I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Chair. I will thank staff for their work, and I'm happy to support for tonight the scenario that's on the floor.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Any questions from members of committee? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Miller, just a little bit of clarity for myself. If you advance a capital project and are going to endure debt, is the actual money only associated when the project's completed? So if you enter into a project of 3 years, at an interest rate today, we've already raised 75 basis points, and then in 3 years' time, it goes up another 75 basis points. That's when the debt is actually on the project, or is it at the onset when you set out that you're going to do the project? Like, would you borrow the amount of money right at the start of the project, or only added to the project at the end?
Through you, Chairman Morales. So we have practices being to generally borrow the money at the end of the project. We have done it recently where we've done it through towards the end of the, closer to the end, not at the very end for the first responders. So yeah, we wouldn't, the practice is being, if we borrow it all now today, what you have to remember is we do have to pay debt servicing costs on it. So that's one. If the project's completed in 3 years, if they end up spending, let's say, less, then you've overborrowed for that amount. And again, under the Act, the Municipal Act, we can only, if we overborrow, we can only use those funds for a similar project. So I'm aware of one scenario where the Region of Peel actually had advanced a lot of debt a number of years ago on water wastewater projects. And their timing was way off because the actual completion of the projects was quite a bit later than they had anticipated. So there is a risk that if you pre-borrow and 5 years later the project's done, you're paying a lot more interest on it. So it's generally the city's practice has been usually at the end, and generally in the municipal world, it's sort of a similar sort of timeline, of course, depending on your cash flow. So the projects starting today, if we're going to issue, it would be 2-3 years out, depending on how long it takes to finish them.
So it could endure a follow-up.
Yeah.
So you could endure a little bit more of an increase in the cost. One question though, when you say if you overborrow, you have to use it for similar projects, are you not able to return the money? Like almost like a revolving line of credit. If you don't use it, it's there. Is that not part of the Municipal Act?
So through you, Chairman Rouse. So when we issue debt, it's long-term debt. So if we do a short-term line of credit or something like that, yes, that would be the case, but you're not securing the long-term debt interest rate. So we go to market, investors come and buy City of Barrie debt. So it's the, you know, the way it's structured is that you can't give it back. You have to pay it back. There are avenues you could look at doing sinking funds and that sort of thing, but generally speaking, no, you borrowed it and you pay it back over time.
So basically, it would be like breaking a closed mortgage. There's penalties to do everything like that. So you borrow it, you have to pay it back in the installments because it's investors come in and buy Barry's debt. Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Any other members of the committee have any other questions? No questions. Councillor Owen, no questions. Okay. So seeing no questions, I'm just going to go back here to the place I had. So the motion is on the floor as read aloud earlier. I will now take a vote. All those in favor, please indicate. In favor, in favor. Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you, members of committee. And we also have the water bill support program for low-income households and small businesses. That the report to Finance and Corporate Services Committee dated April 20th, 2021, concerning a support program for low-income households and small businesses be received for information purposes. Can I have a member of committee place that on the floor, please? Councillor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Harvey. Any members of committee have any questions or comments on this? Mayor Liam. Go ahead.
So yeah, my apologies. I'm switching between the staff report because my iPad quit on me. So this motion only receives the report for information purposes, and obviously I would like to proceed with the program. So staff have provided the report in this format because it was a political direction to create the program, and committee needs to recommend one of the alternatives if we wish any further action to be taken. I thought the report was excellent. I thought there was a few things in this that I hadn't considered. I thought it was interesting that by outsourcing the administration of what is a relatively modest program like this, there could be the knock-on benefit, for example, of people who are in need of other assistance, being directed or assisted with those kinds of opportunities. I think the numbers came in roughly where I was expecting them to come in, and I think the big question that we don't know is how much take-up we would have on it. We probably would have a sense of it because of the take-up on our rec access program. We got about 1% of the population there. And so, I mean, I think, and that's after 6 years, I think, of rec access being underway. So I would move, I guess, as an amendment, since the information received for information motions on the floor, my amendment would be alternative 1. So the report lays this out, and alternative 1 is that Finance and Corporate Services Committee recommend that staff establish the program with the parameters established under motion 21G06. So basically that is along the lines of what council approved as the budget amendment when we asked for staff to go back and set this up. So Mr. Chair, maybe I could just speak for 30 seconds on the alternative.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, the report goes through what a number of other municipalities are already doing, and members of committee may recall that when I put this in front of you at budget time, I'd referenced some of these other programs, and it's very interesting how different municipalities are tackling this issue of trying to support folks who, for example, Newmarket targets seniors specifically and those on ODSP by supporting people who are under GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement under the Old Age Security Act, and people who are on ODSP. Toronto's got a 30% rebate program. That's a healthy rebate, especially in the city of Toronto, for low-income persons, and I think there's a variety of practices. So my hope in this, as always, is that we would see some folks who are in arrears, and the committee will also probably recall that I brought this forward in part because COVID has driven up the number of accounts we have in arrears, which in real person terms is people struggling to pay their water and wastewater bills, even with the deferrals that we offered. So, I think this will actually help us receive some of the cost of the program back, because by offering people assistance with some of their bill, they may agree to pay the rest of it. And that has been the experience in some other, with some other similar programs. So, I don't want to make a big long speech about this. I sort of talked about the reasons I thought it was important that we do this, especially right now. I think proceeding with this, we're 4 months later and we're at a more difficult point of the pandemic. And I think proceeding with this right now would be very, very wise. I think in terms of assisting those who need the assistance, this is a good way to do it because we know we are targeting those who are in that low income situation. We've put a cap on it, so we know that the budget impact will be limited to that cap. And we've designed it, roughly similar to another city program that we have a little bit of experience anyway. Striking that difficult balance of making it easy to apply, and yet making sure that only the people that need the help get the help, and that it's directed to those who need it. So I guess I would encourage members of the committee to support the alternative. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Perfect, Mayor Lehman. So, Ms. Cook, do we have the alternative? Did you make any alterations to the printed alternative? No? Okay, perfect. So the amendment on the floor by Mayor Lehman is as printed in alternative 1, seconded by member of committee, Councillor Thompson. Okay, so it's on the floor. Any discussion, questions on the amendment? Deputy Mayor Ward.
Sure. The first question is just strictly for clarity. I know, Mayor Lehman, the original report called for small businesses. The alternative one only talks about residential. You only want a program for residents. Is that correct?
Yeah, unfortunately, the issue that cropped up with the grants crops up here around picking and choosing. There are other ways to do it, as the report issues indicates for Newmarket, but I think it would need to be a separate program, either with a broader application or through one of the other channels that's available to us under legislation.
Okay, and just to understand the process here, are we going to get another report back with the program, the proposed program, before it goes into effect? That's a question for staff, I guess.
Mr. Miller?
Through you, Councillor Morales, I think the program is described in the report. If you want us to clarify anything, we can. Alternative 1 basically indicates that we'd be the thresholds would be determined using the what's called the LICO tables that are provided by the government. And then we would develop an application progress similar to the RAC Access program, whereby we would then confirm that the low income amounts, how many people living in their house, and then would apply a monthly credit. So if you want us to provide more clarity, we can.
Well, I guess maybe it just wasn't clear on what exactly the program was going to be, because there's various programs for other municipalities. Is it going to be a rebate of part of their bill, or?
Yeah, so as described in the report, it would be a credit applied to their balance. Like it'd be a monthly credit, or in this case, since we bill sort of over 2 months period, they would get a credit each bill period that they go through for those that qualify. So then that would reduce the amount of bill, the amount that they would have to pay. And then the process is really, we would then, the upfront work is really establishing the criteria and the forms that they send in and checking that box off, and then we would process it on a monthly basis.
There's a specific one I wanted to ask about, and that's because I get not a lot, but probably once or twice a year, I get somebody calling about something that's replied to in the Thunder Bay program, where they got a high water bill because of a leak. I mean, that can be devastating. It can be literally $1,000 bill suddenly for somebody. Would this be included in the program, or would that have to be a separate program to Thunder Bay one? I think 50% of the excess you get credit for if you can show it's a leak.
So through you, Councillor Chairman Morales, that's not included in the alternative 1 motion, the Thunder Bay high water one. So if you wanted to introduce something like that, then
I'd like to see if it's at least feasible. I mean, the person that called me about a couple of weeks ago had literally $1,000 bill, and she was faced with, and she was living on government assistance, and it was, yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can help these people. Those are the people I think need a lot of help, and it doesn't happen often. I don't think it'd be a large amount, but there are occasions where somebody has a leak and it's a huge bill.
I'm going to go to Mayor Lehman. I saw him put his hand up, and then Ms. McAlpine, I'll go to you.
Yeah, so I guess if she's living on government assistance, Barry, she might well qualify for the program. But it would, the only criteria we set was LECO, not a high bill. But the high bill, the AMRs are supposed to catch that. And I know it's difficult because sometimes we're unable to reach the homeowner. But the whole point of having meters that read themselves and transmitted data regularly is they would catch those spikes. So I wonder if staff can maybe help answer the deputy mayor's question, because I think it's a good one. I still now and again get those high bill calls, and I wonder why they slip through the system, so to speak.
Before you answer, and sometimes it can be a leaky toilet or a running toilet, and within 2 or 3 days, it can add up a huge amount. I have personal experience with that from a few years ago. Okay.
Perfect. Ms. McAlpine, then I'll go to Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Councilor Morales. My comment was going to be similar to the mayor's, that the reason that we do have the meters is to allow people to monitor their water usage and check for those items. And I would note that historically there have been a few people who've come before committee seeking this, and the response from council has been consistent to date that it doesn't provide assistance for high water bills. So I think the impact may be more significant than you would assume, given past experience and the criteria that could be applied.
Thank you, Mr. McAlpine. Mr. Miller?
Yeah, through Chairman Morales, I don't think I can really add any more than what's being said. The city of Barrie is ahead with the ability to go online and check your meter. It's unfortunate. It does happen. And luckily, a lot of cases, it could be a lot worse if we didn't have the system that the city currently uses.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Deputy Mayor Ward, any follow-up on your question? Do you want to do a friendly?
I mean, the Thunder Bay program was only for low-income seniors and I think people on low-income people generally. And, so it wouldn't be like everybody was going to start coming to the city to say, my toilet was running, I've got $1,000 bill here. I don't know.
Would you like
I'd like to be looked at to see if we could offer some kind of program, because it's a very large amount. I mean, it's much more than your monthly bill.
Are you moving an amendment to the mayor's amendment, or are you hoping that that's a friendly?
Well, could I just have staff included in and then report back to us maybe by memo if they've looked at it or whether it's feasible, maybe looking at the Thunder Bay program.
Ms.
See
Cook,
much it costs Thunder Bay, because Thunder Bay is a fairly similar sized city to us.
Ms. Cook, do you need that in print for the amendment and the motion as amended, or can you do that on verbal directive?
Through you, Councilor Morales. Ms. McAlpine put her camera on. I think she wanted to speak before we did the amendment.
Yep, for sure. Ms. McAlpine, go ahead.
Thank you, Councilor Morales. I was just going to note that the current motion doesn't require a memo or a report. So if that's something that you're seeking, a motion would be required. And I would note that there have been a significant number of requests for reports that have taken a significant amount of staff time, particularly in the finance department, to analyze these. And we are tending to be a bit behind on our standard work as a result of that. So I just wanted to offer that context to people as before another report is requested.
I want to ask for a report. Could I just ask for a memo on somebody call Thunder Bay up, find out how much their program costs every year? I'd like to know, to get a rough idea, because ours would be similar, I'm sure. If it's a few thousand a year, if it's 100,000 a year, I mean, it'd be nice to know that. Just a memo back, and then the committee can decide in the future whether to act on it.
That would likely come out of the finance or clerk's department. Ms. Cook, I'll start with you. I don't know if that question is to you, Mr. Miller, Ms. McAlpine.
Through you, Councilor Morales, I'll start, and then if Mr. Miller or Ms. McAlpine want to jump in, I will allow them. The memo would not come from myself. It would come from finance department, since the initial report is from them. And if we're looking to find out what Thunder Bay, it costs for Thunder Bay and the feasibility, it would be up to the finance team to determine that feasibility. But I will defer to Mr. Miller or Ms. McAlpine to provide further response.
Start with Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller?
Through you, Chairman Morales, if that's the wish of committee, we can do a memo.
Okay, and you don't require an amendment like printed on the motion?
I think we do require the printed.
You do? Perfect. Okay. Ms. McAlpine, anything to add to, not a report, but just a memo, a phone call?
Oh, I just was going to add that the memo would still require an amendment.
Okay, perfect.
And I'll put forward a motion that we ask staff for a memo on the cost of a high water bill credit program based on Thunder Bay's program and how much it costs. I'm not looking for a detailed feasibility at this point. I'd like to know how much it costs.
Okay, perfect. And on a side note, I'm not making that phone call to Thunder Bay. I think Councillor Harvey might know why. Deputy Mayor Lehman, is that friendly, or are we amending your amendment?
You don't need to vote on it. Sure, we'll include it in my amendment.
There we go. Friendly on a Tuesday. Okay, so the amendment as amended, what Deputy Mayor Ward read, plus the printed alternative one. Any comments or questions on that? Councillor Thompson, did you have your hand up earlier? Like, no, you're good. Okay. I'll make a quick comment. I like the way this program has evolved. And, you know, I hold others accountable, so I'll hold myself accountable. I think I was the only member of council, or one of the few, that voted against the initial COVID response on water bills. Yeah, my stance on this has evolved. I think the big one is we thought COVID, do you remember the 2 weeks flatten the curve and we'll go back to normal? This is, yeah, exactly. This has evolved. This is a different reality. I think the comments I made around that time is, you know, that's a significant hit to provide a very small benefit that in my mind occupied the temporary sphere. That's not the case anymore. So I do commend Mayor Lehman. You pushed the program, you and Councillor Harvey, a couple of others, really all of council got behind it. And it has been effective in the long term. I think the other comments or more question I'll make to Mr. Miller is, once the program gets rolled out, obviously we can look at the metrics. There's a cap on how much the program is going to go up to. I don't know if people are essentially changing the water usage. And I don't mean that net, I mean that gross. So for example, yes, there's more showers at home, there's more dishes, there's more living at home, but proportionately there's less water usage in commercial and industrial and possibly industrial locations. So have we had a a gross increase on our water usage as a city from all sectors, or has it just essentially been redistributed, aligning with how people are now living?
Through you, or to you, Chairman Morales. Yeah, for 2020, we'd done a report a couple of months ago. We basically saw the residential flows were up, and then they were offset by the commercial industrial flows had gone down. It was actually very similar. I think it was around 6% decrease and 6% increase. So for 2020, there's certainly you can see the change in patterns of people's how they're living today.
Is that correlated with a drop in water usage from commercial properties or industrial properties?
Yes, it is.
And is it identically proportional or a bit of a
very
shift?
Close? The percentage, I don't have it in front of me, but it was a very percentage-wise, it was a very close. I think it was around 6% increase in residential, and then it was offset with a decrease in flows of around 6% in commercial industrial for 2020.
That's very interesting. This is probably beyond my scope to even ask this question, but that's very interesting to see that, because obviously we have commuters who work out of town and then people who work in town that live elsewhere. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if we can extrapolate data from those numbers. It's more of a Fermi problem, but seeing that, you know, are people essentially working less out of town based on the redistribution of water consumption from their workplaces to home. So anyways, I'll leave that a little bit. And my final question, Mr. Miller, is if this program goes forward, are there any opportunities on the horizon to essentially get money from the feds or the province to cover the cost of this subsidy or this program? Anything on the budget, anything in your world
Councilor Morales, nothing that I'm aware of this time, no.
Okay, perfect. And as always, staff are always keeping an ear out if there's programs out there and we can repatriate different tax monies, that would be great to fund our programs. So anyways, those are my comments about my my previous stances on this program. Again, once again, members of council, I know there was a couple members of council that I don't want to leave anybody out, and Mayor Lehman, who championed this. Thank you for working with staff the way this program has evolved. And let's pump it out to our residents, whatever communication channels each councilors use. We got to get in front of eyeballs for people to apply. So and hopefully throw in the senior tax property tax deferral program while you're at it, which has been popular in the past. So with that, I'll take the vote. All those in favor, please indicate. Perfect. That's unanimous. Thank you. So that passes. And I believe that we don't have any other items on the agenda. Ms. Cook, do we have any other items on the agenda?
No, Councillor Morales, you can adjourn the meeting.
Perfect. I will be adjourning the meeting at 7:04. Have a great evening, everybody.